Hello, everyone. My name is Leticia Berrisbeitia, and I'm here at the Young Women Training Center office in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. I am very, very glad to welcome you today to this open webinar, and we have titled this online session, Training for Gender Equality as Subversion. And it aims to be a conversation on this subject with two of our partners from the Kidd Royal Tropical Institute, but it also serves as an introduction to the Professional Development Program of Gender Trainers, which is a training course that we deliver jointly. So here on your screens, you will see right now a brief overview of how this session is going to go. So first, we will go through logistics and how this webinar works, how to interact through the GoToWebinar platform. Then we will introduce today panelists. I will have the pleasure to do that. And following that, our panelists will hold a dialogue about training for gender equality as subversion, and also provide some details and an overview of the Professional Development Program of Gender Trainings about the course. So finally, we will have some questions at the end. Some time, to reply to your questions and to share your feedback. So how are we going to do this? You have now a logistics slide, and please bear in mind that you can send your comments and questions during the webinar at any time through the chat box, that it looks somewhat like the one you have on screen right now. So please make sure to write your questions. We're really looking forward to hear from you. And you can also, if you have any questions once the webinar ends, you also have an address there to send it to us. So also, you have to know that this webinar is being recorded right now, and it will be made available through our YouTube channel, the Young Women Training Center YouTube channel. You can Google it if you don't remember that address. And also, you don't have to remember anything, because we're going to send a follow-up email with all this information and more, and the recording, of course. So that's point number 3. You will get that email, and also we will be having our webcams on during this presentation. So please, if you happen to present any connectivity or internet issues, you have also the option in the upper menu bar or of your screen, of your GoToWebinar screen, to unplug them, to select only hide the webcams, as you see on your screen. So moving forward, I am, as I said, very happy because I can introduce today's panelists, which are two of our colleagues from the Kidd Royal Tropical Institute. They're Dr. Moitri Mukhopadhyay and Dr. Franz Wong. Hello, Franz. Hi, Moitri. And they will be leading this conversation and on training for gender equality as subversion. But also I want to say a couple of lines about them before we start. Dr. Moitri is a social anthropologist. She's specialized in social development with a focus on gender and development, and she has over 30 years of experience in gender and development research, advisory work, teaching, and training. Dr. Franz has been a gender specialist for over 10 years, and he specializes in gender mainstreaming policy and practice, including organization assessment, strategy development, for research centers, multilateral and bilateral development agencies, and NGOs. So thank you so much for joining, both of you. Let's see if I can hear you now. Okay, say hi.
Hello everybody.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. So we will have this in a Q&A and question and answer forum, and we'll be interviewing them today. So my first question would be, how can gender training be subversive? Of what and for whom? How can gender training be subversive? Of what and for whom? And I believe that Franz can start to talk about this. Yeah.
Thank you, Leticia. I think you phrased the question correctly in a sense of what and for whom, because I certainly don't want to get people the idea that gender training is subversive of people. So it's not actually undermining people, but we're taking a wider view of subversion. And for example, thinking of in terms of the what, it's looking at these development frames that we work with in international development, and understanding how, on the one hand, yes, we can be trying to integrate gender issues in a particular sector or particular approach, results-based development. But that's a particular frame, that's a way of looking at the world. And when we think about subversion of what, it's actually of these frames. Take, for example, the emphasis on economic development. Absolutely important, but it frames and privileges certain ways of doing things that don't always work for women's rights or gender equality. So it's about counting GDP and then export production. We know that only that includes some people and excludes others. So the subversion part is really about these world views that we hold dear in our hearts in development, and I include ourselves, as Moichi and I are within this this industry, that we always don't know they exist, and that's part of the problem. We've become so used to these ideas and the discourses of development that we just don't know that we're using them, and before you know it, we're actually privileging a particular view of the world, of what has changed, what counts as change.
Yeah, thanks, Franz. I'll just take on from you, and I'll talk about. I want to mention in this regard about subversion and why subversion, gender training as a subversive activity, has become very, very important now, and it's because it's many generations, Franz, after, well, at least 2 generations after. I mean, we were that generation of gender trainers before gender mainstreaming happened, and by now, as you rightly point out, many people know the word gender, the concept gender. There's been a lot of gender training, and it has been in the context of gender mainstreaming. And more often than not, this keeps happening in gender mainstreaming, where the main frame of the particular mainstream remains intact, with all the values and all the paradigms that are actually quite harmful for equality per se, but especially for gender equality. And then you're supposed to add gender. And in doing so, we've evolved a practice which is all about the status quo and not at all about social change. And that's what we want to do. The subversion involves actually taking a good look at these development frames and seeing how they actually are not going to achieve the outcome, which is gender equality, and so how impossible it is to just do gender within that. So I would suggest that yes, gender training is subversive activity, and it's subversive for those participants as well as for the trainer themselves.
And I'll take it one more another level, Moichi, which I hope you would agree with me. It's also subversive is actually how we do gender and how we think of gender and development and how we think of gender training itself. So this program is working with gender trainers, and really the professional development is also in some ways subverting, in a sense of challenging, these truisms that we've all inherited. And let me give you examples of that. One of the truisms right now is that gender is considered about men and women, and either men and women's roles or men's and women's needs. Absolutely. That's the main understanding. And the problem with that is actually becoming that it becomes these binary categories, these homogeneous categories. And we know that men and women are not categories unto themselves. You're socially positioned differently as a woman or as a man based on other social dimensions of class, caste, your sexual orientation, gender identity, your religion, where you are, your urban, rural. So you can't talk about men and women as categories themselves. And we know that certainly from feminist thinking, we can bring in an intersectional perspective to that. But more than that, when you think about men and women as these binary categories, it's not as if they exist in free space. In fact, they're related to each other in as much as the dominant category, that being of men or the male bias category, to which women are compared. So basically now you have two categories of which one sets the base, the the standard, and the other is always catching up. So you think about women's leadership. A lot of women's leadership programs are about fixing women, how to be more articulate, how to be more confident, not thinking about these ideas about what is leadership. So also we're trying to get to the idea about subverting main ideas and understandings of gender that we find not very helpful. And what do you do with that? There are men and women are two binary categories. And we're subverting in terms of how this is taught in gender training. So that's also part of the subversion, that gender training is more than just a good facilitation skill or giving knowledge and filling people with information. In fact, it's bringing and inspiring through this process a critical analysis to what Moichi was talking about, which is these development frames, so that participants and trainers themselves can see the potential for change in basically seeing gender development in a different light.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to add something, Moitri?
No, I would go on to the next question.
Yes, the second question would be then, can training for gender equality be transformative, and transformative for professionals and their dominant understandings of development and understandings that are hostile to the realization of women's rights? So what would you say about that?
Yeah, it's just following on from what we've just said.
Yes.
It can be extremely, it can be very transformative for the trainer, because basically what you're doing is you're giving people a vision of social change rather than telling them about the maintenance of the status quo. By questioning the very frames, what you're doing is giving them a vision that this change is possible and we don't have to stick to the given status quo. It's also very, very empowering for participants, because and we've had that experience, Franz. I'm sure you can speak to it also, where, for example, scientists, we were training scientists on gender, and their science was agriculture. And when you talk to them about farmers, which is what they're dealing with, besides, of course, improving seeds and crops and etc., but they, on the ground, they're dealing with farmers. And when you start breaking down these categories, men and women, and showing them that the competition is not between men and women, and there are no categories, but these men and women in real life are extremely differentiated. And you talk to them about what they know, that is, large farmers, small farmers, powerful farmers, not very powerful farmers, marginal farmers, and they begin to see, they begin to understand. They immediately, not that's rather patronizing of me. No, they translate it into their own work. They begin to see what differentiation does, and it's empowering, because it's about looking at society and seeing how change can happen, taking into consideration the positions of people.
I think it's also transformative for trainers themselves, and it can be in the sense of, and I'll take extending it from your example, Moitri. A lot of work right now is around gender mainstreaming, and it's assumed that the challenge is you have the mainstream, so mainstream health policy or mainstream economic development or agricultural research. That's the mainstream, and you're integrating gender into that. So you have a gender objective, or you're trying to make it gender aware. That's one way, that's one frame. And we've become so used to that and sort of working in that, how do we get gender or the gender word in the document? When what we've missed actually is maybe it's the mainstream itself that needs to change. And what I mean by that is, it's how do we think about agricultural research? Is it just about increasing productivity, particularly sometimes to increase export revenue and export agriculture? I mean, so it's really about getting people, at least trainers, to understand that yes, we have to work with these frames. We don't have to accept them uncritically. In fact, that we can be more critically engaging with what we've accepted and have really internalized as truisms in development. That, you know, the classics, 75% of farmers are women. All these mantras, all these truisms that we just repeat over and over again that really need unpacking. And that's what we're trying to do with this work.
Yeah. And the other side of the story is the man is the farmer and the women just follow on. That is also a truism that's very, very widely, kind of imagined.
Right, right.
Okay.
And when we talk about truisms, I think we're not necessarily denying these things, but we're saying that we repeat these so often that we don't understand where they've come from and what are the other realities to these. So again, subversion isn't what do I want to say? An exercise of tearing things down for the sake of tearing things down. It's about actually critically examining upon the basis of which we make these claims, in particular gender-based claims, and ask ourselves, where do we get this idea? How do we get this idea that, that for example, female-headed households are the same as male-headed households, except that the sex of the person who's most prominent changes? So we really need to be understanding some of these development ideas more critically.
So in line with that, and regarding the role of gender trainers, how can gender trainers maintain their critical edge in support of gender equality while also engaging with professionals in mainstream development?
Yeah. Maybe I can start with that. I mean, it's a difficult position being a gender trainer, and I think, and I'm sure a lot of our audience members can sympathize. Certainly, the participants who have joined us for the last two cohorts understand, and certainly in our years of working as gender trainers, it's a challenging task. And the trick, I suppose, is not to be subsumed by the mainstream itself and become complicit in it. What do I mean by that? So yes, a trainer has to be relatable. There's an element of performance, particularly if you've just been fighting to get your one-day training on the agenda, or trying to negotiate the conditions to do the training. It's an uphill battle. And one does not win that battle by being uncooperative. So you have to be cooperative. But on the other hand, that does not necessarily mean complicit. So the trick for the gender trainer is to find ways to get across a critical messaging in ways that can actually inspire and prick the interests of those who you're working with. And part of that is also being self-reflexive. And that's what we try to do in our program, is to not only build skills and understanding, but how do trainers as knowledge producers also see themselves within this process of development and knowledge production. And Marjorie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do want to. One of the ways in which I think you can, well, first of all, let me just also echo what Francis has said. It is difficult to be a gender trainer because the gender trainer, their position, is such that in most organizations, all the resistance just sticks to them. The resistance for gender, resistance to the people who call the training, etc. All of it sticks to the gender trainer. So you already come in sometimes with everybody feeling hostile. They have so much more important work to do, and they've been asked to attend the gender training. In fact, after last year's course, when people had to present their training designs, I went up and hugged each one of them, because the situations in which they were training were so extremely difficult that I just felt it is very hard. Having said that, one of the things that really does help to maintain the critical edge is what we try to inculcate, that is conceptual fluency. If one is a trainer, one must be very conversant with the foundational concepts that are simply critical to the gender and development debate. And because gender and development, after all, remember, came about as a critique of development. It was never supposed to be, we shall get into the mainstream. No, it came as a critique of development, that development was always trying to make women, kind of the backward group that had to catch up with economic development, was ignoring reproductive labor altogether in the development paradigms, main paradigms ignored. So it came about as a critique of development. So therefore, I think that the conceptual clarity that is that we inculcate, we try to encourage, helps to overcome and these critical situations that you face when training, as well as it helps to maintain and a critical edge towards the mainstream frame of development. So that's one of the things we try to do. Yes, you have to be nice to your audience. Yes, you have to be cooperative, but often, and what our advice is, and that's what we hope that in this program we offer, is that you have to be on the top of your game. You can't just talk, do methods. You just can't animate people through methods. These are adults, they are learning. Your participants are adults. It is conceptual fluency that will, for you, help to win the day, help you to remain critical.
And just to add to that, I think that's a really good point, in a sense that it's this idea about, how do you maintain your critical edge and at the same time still have a job, I suppose. It's actually through insights, critical insight, that you bring. And so it's not only having that fluency and that insight, but being able to convey and inspire others to also critically engage. I think on one hand, yes, it's probably the easier route is to be pleasant and to repeat all these truisms. But at some point, what we certainly find is that at some point people are saying, well, we kind of know that, but it hasn't worked so far. So how do you use that as a trainer, that critical perspective, and to stimulate insight or amongst your participants, so they actually gain some substantial knowledge and understanding from your work? And I think then what you're bonding over, hopefully, not all the time, is actually around insights. Because we have to remember, at the end of the day, not all, I would say, but development practitioners are in it for some reason, and they are interested and in learning about some more insightful knowledge. And I think that's what a trainer needs to bring. Not just good skills, that's good form, very important, but basically they have to have something to say that's credible and that's derived from analysis.
So let's talk a bit more specifically about the program then. What role does the professional development program of Gender Trainer have in this process? What would you say?
Well, Trina, want to take a lead on that? I can jump in.
Leticia, the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking more specifically about the program now, about the professional development program of Gender Trainers. So what role would you say that the program has in this process?
Okay, sorry. Yes, the role of the trainer in the whole process of this professional development program. First of all, this is designed for trainers with some sort of experience, some amount of experience, not that we don't make an exception. And there are particular things that we emphasize in this. Underlying it is a feminist vision of change, and transformation. We try to develop conceptual fluency, but at the same time, we also help participants to reflect on their practice and to make content and method work hand in hand. So we're highly participatory. It's about co-creation of knowledge, of training knowledge, and by co-creation we mean that the participation results in something new rather than adding everybody's contribution and stirring. So these are some of the ways in which the professional program for gender trainers helps trainers or works with trainers.
Yeah.
Franz, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think what's been really fascinating about this program and a challenge and also exciting is that how to put this? I mean, you certainly wouldn't. You would want to use the same methodological approaches in working with trainers that you would want them to use in their practice. And so if the idea is about recognizing different knowledges and ways of knowing as a way to expand an understanding of these different frames, and one has to do that within the program itself. I think that became quite exciting because while we would encourage trainers to draw upon feminist pedagogical principles, we too need to do the same in the program and need to be accountable for that. You can't just say one thing and do another. So I think part of the role of the program is to not only to enlighten, but also to share, but also to demonstrate about how a different knowledge production process, i.e. training, can be conceived differently. And that keeps us on our toes, which is actually quite interesting in itself. It forces us to be reflexive, to be open for comments and challenges, and to also have our own story straight, and also be clear about what do we want to say about a particular issue. And that's good practice. So in many ways, it's good professional development, certainly for us running this program. And that's part of the co-creation process, because we're not only co-creating, but we're co-growing, if you want to say.
Yeah, and we are constantly being surprised by the insights that participants bring, or they create the insights that they co-create. So it's a very good learning experience for all of us, all around.
We just, an example is we just finished, we'll go into the details of what these are about. Their first assignments by groups, and we had 2 groups look at some popular campaigns right now from a sort of feminist critical perspective, and they were just completely enlightening. And one of our resource people was saying that this is really original work. Now, why is it that we're not actually taking a critical perspective of these global campaigns? And so also people are creating knowledge in this program. And in some ways, we're really trying to build into the program a depth of knowledge, because what we recognize is that gender trainers become gender trainers in various ways. For the most part, it's on the job. You become involved in gender issues, and then you become fluent in an area, and then you're an expert or a specialist or a trainer. And very few, or if they have, it's been quite a while ago, really become familiar with these classic readings and thinkings and insights that have animated gender development since the 1980s. And so that's what this program does, is give people that foundation from which they can build and feel confident. I remember in our first cohort, a really honest moment when people said, you know, I feel like a fraud as a gender trainer. I'm having to speak in front of people and be a trainer, and I'm not quite sure of what I'm always saying. And so what this program does is give people that confidence, that base, so that they can stand, you know, more strongly and more confidently and further the work that they do. So this is not a training of trainers. This is not something where we give people a curriculum and they go off and do the curriculum themselves. This is really foundational building for trainers to continue doing their work.
Yeah, and it's also for people who've been gender trainers for a long time or for some time. It's a kind of reorientation of what they do and re-energizing of what they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe with that we can talk a little bit about the structure, Leticia.
Yes, thank you both so much for such interesting dialogue and reflection. So yes, let's see how the program is structured in terms of module states and so on. So Francis, if you want to proceed with that.
Sure. Okay, maybe go to the first slide. So the program really comes from a recognition of the state of gender training. So over the decades that Moichi and I have been training, we've seen these shifts of what gender training has become, and particularly the challenges that gender trainers faced. And so we have a wider agenda with this program, and that's particularly to reposition gender training as a strategy to challenge and engender the mainstream development, and particularly in the context of the SDGs. So we do have this, to be clear, a wider agenda. And what we're trying to do is for the program to support a rethinking of what is gender training as feminist knowledge transfer and creation. We're trying to reclaim gender training as a catalyst for gender transformation, as opposed to being complicit in the ways of thinking and frames that, as we mentioned before, we feel do not really work for gender equality and women's position. So overall, this is we're going to the third cohort. We're trying to develop a global cadre of gender trainers equipped with feminist pedagogy. So we do, certainly as a program, have these wider ambitions. Next slide. Now, the program itself has very specific learning goals, and we expect that at the end of the program, what we've seen by the end of the program, we can say now, is that they really sharpened their training skills and the knowledge of gender and development concepts, as we talked about before, these foundational ideas. And they've been better able to really employ different learning and knowledge strategies, not at the level necessarily of techniques, but understanding about how one goes about in building knowledge and skills and attitudes around gender issues. And we're also at the end of the program for trainers themselves for them to reclaim gender training as a political feminist process and to have this renewed energy. So Moichi mentioned that our main sort of target for this are mid to senior experienced gender trainers. So we recognize after so many years of working in the mainstream development, you get a little worn down, you get a little tired. So this program is very much about to reconnect with these ideas that we feel and we've experienced can animate our thinking, so that participants really have this renewed energy from a different perspective and a renewed commitment to gender training as a transformatory process. And the program is built on three learning domains. One is a conceptual depth and clarity that we've talked about before, particularly around feminist and gender development literature and concepts. One is the more practical training skills and methods, so practicing from design to facilitation, and also internalizing feminist practices within the both the conceptual work, so the critical analysis, but also in terms of the training skills from a feminist pedagogical perspective. And each of these learning domains have their own subsets. So if we could go to that. So what one is, and as I mentioned, the conceptual depth is really this foundational base of gender development theory. And to develop this conceptual understanding as gender, particularly as a social relation and how it interfaces with development, and really for participants to critically engage with this mainstream, with these frames that we've talked about, not necessarily repeat them and be complicit in the reproduction. Feminist practice is really about understanding about politics of knowledge production. What do we mean by this? Gender training is not just a matter of me giving someone else this knowledge as an ABC. It's not about banking type of education. It's really about developing these critical skills to engage and to understand what is the knowledge that actually is being conveyed within development practice and with the gender training itself. And part of that is also developing critical self-analysis skills. So how does one situate yourself as a trainer and part of this knowledge production process? Are you being complicit in relegating gender into a particular way, or are you also stimulating some sort of critical reflection and processes? And how do you do that as an insider outside that we mentioned before about being a catalyst, but also being a gender trainer? And then there's a third body, which is really about these skills and design, training design, communication skills, clarity of messaging and of ideas, and understanding about different pedagogies. In particular, what we're looking at are learner-centered pedagogies. Next. And the program is developed over 3 modules. So it's a 6-month program. It starts with a module 1, which is a 1-week face-to-face workshop in Amsterdam, where we really focus on the theoretical perspective of gender and development. It's revisiting or being introduced for the first time these foundational ideas and readings that have animated gender development since the 1980s. The second module, it lasts about 5 months, and it's virtual, and it's comprised of different virtual dimensions. So 2 of them are assignments. So there are 2 assignments. One is a group assignment and one is an individual assignment that people do with our support and mentoring, of course. There are a series of webinars around training design and particular themes that we feel is important. There is group work where people work together virtually, as well as one-on-one mentoring. And that leads us then to the third module, which again is a 1-week module in Amsterdam, where we're bringing this learning and trying to understand now contemporary development policy and practice, and understanding where we're at today and how we can bring these ideas. I should mention that in addition to Moichi and myself, we work with and draw upon a number of resource people who participate either in person or virtually. And these are people who are more established within the gender development field, and also people who are introducing more contemporary and bringing insights into this work. So as many of you know, we had Naila Kabir and then Whitehead and Maria Gertz, some of the founders of gender and development, you could say. And then we have more contemporary thinkers who are bringing insight into contemporary issues around gender issues. We have Nandini Mbuparai and others working, for example, with the environment. So we try to bring together a diversity of resource people to support participants' learning.
Thank you, Franz. And that was a wonderful overview. So before we get to the question and answer part, we also wanted to share with the attendees today the website for the Professional Development Program for Gender Trainers that has a lot of information that you might find useful. I'm going to put it here on screen right now. So here you go. You don't have to remember this address. You can either Google the name of the program, or rest assured that you will receive that in the follow-up email to this presentation. So we have a start and the end date along with the total duration, the language of the program, the fee, and also the dates for application. So it's very important to bear in mind that the deadline for scholarship application is earlier than the deadline for general application. So that's 15 March 2019. So make sure you meet that date. And also the contact information. You will see in the right side of that screen the link, to apply. So for applying, you have to fill out this form and add all the requisite that they requested by it. So make sure that you make enough time for doing that and then submitting it. So also here, if you scroll down, you have more information about the program, some of which we have shared right now, but also some more details like the audience and description, the background, and of how this program came to be, and also the approach and structure, some details about the logistics, scholarship information, contact information, and also even some readings if you want to go into content right away. So I do hope you find this useful. And as I said, we will send this out to all of you, all the registrants, not only the attendees. And we're ready now to the question and answer part.
Leticia, can I just maybe just offer a bit additional information on the scholarships? So we recognize that not everybody is in a position to have an organization to fund their participation or self-fund. We do have scholarship opportunities, and as Leticia mentioned, the deadline for those applications are March 15, and on the website you'll see that scholarships the opportunities are for those from eligible countries. So we're finalizing scholarships for opportunities, but basically we offer them to people after they've been accepted to the program. So your first step is to apply for the program and indicate if you do need support, and then that becomes a separate process, just for clarification.
So thank you, Franz. Yes, that's a very important point. Thank you for clarifying. So we can proceed and project some of your questions to the screen. I would only like to remind you that we are receiving many questions and we're reading everything you send to us. We're also compiling them. And the ones that we do not reach, that we're not able to answer today due to time constraints, we will make sure to follow up through email. And also feel free to contact us anytime. So, Franz and Moitri, you're going to the questions right now, but whenever you are ready, feel free to pick one and read it out loud to the audience, please, and then comment on what our participants are saying.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you want to start, Moitri, or I can see?
Yeah, well, I was going to start.
Okay, please.
I'll take the first one. Can a gendered researcher rather than a trainer be eligible for the training? Well, it depends. We give priority to people who've had some experience in training, but it's not that we have not had other professionals doing gender in the program. So it really depends on your circumstances and what you want to do. So the best is to apply and see what happens. Franz, did you want to take up number two? No, actually, the first one has two questions there by two different people. For those of us doing field work and who cannot join, will you have open spaces like this webinar to participate in the group? I'm afraid that the first module does require, first and third module, does require 1 week each presence in Amsterdam. It's face-to-face. The intervening time, almost 2.5 months, is actually virtual, like this webinar. But you have to be registered for the course to be able to access it. Franz, over to you. Any of the other questions that we could?
Maybe I'll take number 4 and 5. So how have you applied the subversive approach to gender in development settings you've worked in? What is the most effective way to quote unquote subvert from within? Good question, Rachel. And maybe I'll take that also with how can the gender of the trainer themselves serve or hinder subversion. Aha. Okay, Randall. How can you apply this? Well, I guess the short answer to that question is how have you applied subversive approach to the sector's work then? I think it's to understand, first of all, and that's where you're doing your homework, whether as a gender specialist or in particular as a trainer, about what is the sector made of? What is the theoretical basis that it's comprised of? A lot of areas or subsectors have a particular paradigm about what they how they see the world. So for example, in agricultural research, the paradigm or the way of knowing is this biophysical episteme, right? It's about what is considered as truth, and what counts as knowledge, and who's the farmer, and about, for the most part, increasing productivity. So one has to understand, or another example would be gender-based violence. A lot of the work done programmatically on gender-based violence comes from the health sector. So it's very much influenced by a health sector paradigm. So part of the work of building a case for different ways of looking at things, which is the subversive part, is really understanding upon which the paradigm that the sector is built. And that takes some really reading into what's being said and not being said, what's being what's in between the lines. And we actually practice this in the program. One of the first assignments as a group is we ask these groups to look at one document as an example. So the idea is to practice this skill, and it could be a gender policy of some organization. And what is it actually saying about gender? What is it? How is it explicitly, if not implicitly, understanding gender and how it relates to this particular area? So it is this analytical capacity that I think is required to be subversive. And we're trying to, part of the program is building this capacity. And certainly part of our work in different sectors is to really question what are these truisms about the sector. Maybe I'll stop there, and maybe I'll come back to Randall's after, as I've gone quite a bit. Moitri, do you want to take a question?
I didn't quite get question number 6, but I think I'm going to take 7.
Okay.
I'm afraid that for Sarish, thank you. That's a good question. But yes, of course, gender training as subversion will vary from culture to culture, but also depends on what you mean by culture. Remember, the generations is time-bound, it's context-specific, and it changes also in history. So this category again, I'm sorry, the Western and Eastern is like saying, again, you're building categories. It's Western and Eastern. So in the West, there are lots of different countries and cultures. There's no one Western. Similarly, in the East, what is true from where you are speaking, it may not be so true further east in some other country. So I'm afraid these categories have to be broken down. But basically, yes, it depends. It's the truism that gender is context-specific and historically bound. So one idea of gender is not actually is not for it's not one size fits all. How do you justify in this case? I'm not sure what that means. I'm suggesting what works for the so-called West, doesn't work for the East. I'm afraid, no matter where you are, which culture you are, there is gender. People are gendered. And so I'm not sure what the justification would look like. It's a fact that we are all gendered human beings. Okay.
As one of our thinkers that we follow says, gender is everywhere.
Yes.
Yes.
Would you like to take another questions from this slide? We have another one and still some time to
Sure.
go through
I think there's some more here. At least I'll start with 6 and see if we get to the other ones. I mean, so these other truisms. I think one can answer that question by saying there are different types of truisms when we talk about gender training. There's truisms about gender itself. And I think you've asked a very insightful question of how do they pair to others. You know, there's this truism in agriculture that women are the untapped potential, and I can't remember which FAO statistic it is, but somehow if you got more women involved in agriculture, the sector would grow by so many percentages, right? And so that's tied to the truism of what agriculture is about. Is it about just increasing productivity, let alone food security or improved nutrition? So we have this truisms about gender itself and how it relates to a particular sector. There's certainly truisms about training around gender, that it's a matter of giving knowledge and people, because they don't know, and then they will become genderized. And certainly the sectors themselves have particular truisms about how it sees men and women, as usually in terms of they have particular roles. So again, in agriculture, for that example, women are natural caregivers, so they're going to be the one who should be taught nutrition because they're the ones who are going to distribute the food better and send girls to school or what have you. So these are, in fact, you could probably say that development itself is based on a series of truisms. And it's not to debunk these, but when they become the overriding discourse and justification for what we do, I think that's where it loses its nuance or its actually efficacy. And they certainly are paired. They certainly do reproduce each other to the point where we just stop questioning them. Right? You get repeated over and over again. A part of this program is actually to demonstrate and to build this capacity to have your radar, have your, what should I be actually questioning about how the basis of which things are built, development is built.
That's great. Thank you, Franz. So I believe we did cover them all now. So if we can go to the next slide. So I will give you some more time to go through the questions. And I also see that participants are asking if they will receive this presentation. Why will they? You will have the recording after the session ends, so you can review the whole thing, the whole session, and also the link to the Professional Development Program webpage, and some email of contacts if you have any more questions. So yes, we have a little more time, Franz and Moitri, so feel free again to pick any questions that you would like to reply to.
Franz, your turn first, or shall I go?
That's fine.
9 and 10. I would like to do 9 and 10 together.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, because they're both talking about the tendency to do gender analysis or training, and also the frameworks and tools based on a binary view of gender, precisely. And also this refers to the SDGs too. Well, one of the things that we do try to do, I mean, very centrally, is to actually look at gender from the perspective of social division. So there's no such thing as a binary categories, men and women. That's the first thing we try to clarify. It's almost 3 sessions. And then we build it up and show the big social divisions, caste, class, etc., and that define us, that define our position, and sexual orientation that define often our identities. And in sexual orientation, again, all, for example, lesbian, gay, or transgender people are not, for example, in one category. There is class also that defines them in their position very, very categorically. So you're right on the one hand, but that is what this program is built to question this mainframe binary category of women and men that most development frameworks, tools, and now this SDGs also is built around.
Maybe I could take, do we have time, Leticia, for another question?
We have time for another couple questions, yes.
Right. Maybe I'll take 8 and 14. Thanks, Karim and Bonnie. Karim, bit of a loaded question. Isn't there a misunderstanding? But yes, I would say there is, as you've written the question. But I guess what I'd like to do is relate that to 8 and to, this is part of the self-reflection. I think that misunderstanding is in part because of how gender training has been, continues to be pursued. And the idea, and how to put this in a way without sounding too accusatory, but I think, you know, development is a process of governing bodies, as what you would probably say. And part of that is governing gender trainers. So we become, maybe have started out with quite, you know, ambitious and radical ideas, but very quickly you become subsumed by this industry that we call gender training. You're fighting for your 1 hour, your 1 day, your budget. You've brought into learning these rules of the game, and very quickly do you lose or do not know of or lose touch with these foundational ideas that animated animated gender training from the beginning. So I would say this misunderstanding is in part in the way that gender training has proceeded to evolve. And part of this program is to really try to rediscover for some, discover for others, these foundational ideas, and how do we maintain that our feet in those foundations at the same time contend with all these challenges that are around gender training. And I'll get to Bonnie. So thoughts on gender training versus training in inclusive development. I think this is a good example. So first of all, I don't think it would be a versus. So we've set up now this binary between, you know, gender training versus training in inclusive development. If we think of gender training as a subversive act, that would actually preclude you from talking about training in inclusive development. Inclusive development is a nice term, but let's think about what development is beyond our Amrita Sen definitions of development. Development is about, in fact, a post-development neo-colonial distribution of resources. Some people get, some people don't. Some people get for different reasons. So how can you then talk about inclusion if development has become beyond what we would hope it to be? So therefore, when you talk about gender training, we're talking about is really unpacking these terms such as inclusive development. Well, what do we mean? Inclusive of whom? Who says it's inclusive? Can development, which is essentially a top-down affair, therefore in the hands of the powerful, be truly inclusive? I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, and finally, number 12. Thank you for that question, Sabur. How can we minimize the effects of capitalism on humans? By being subversive. We can't totally destroy the edifice in one go, but this is a good start to actually talk about gender in a fluid way, to subvert the meanings that have solidified around what development means. Maybe we should give it a try. So come and join us.
So there's a little more time only to some final remarks from any of you, if you want to comment it and on anything else, because we won't have enough time to go through more questions. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. The numbers went quite high. I can see them on the top. So there's a lot of interest apparently in issues that we have been talking about. As you will have noticed, we didn't only talk about gender training in a narrow sort of way, in terms of methods and how do you do it, etc., etc. We've really been talking about the politics of development, how to bring about social change, and that's the vision we want that this program animates our participants with. So please apply, please come. We are very happy to have you, and let's dream together, let's co-create together, let's change the world.
How can
Franz?
one follow that? I think the only thing to say is thank you for the people, and this, if you're wondering what the program is like, it is welcoming these sort of some of these questions are really insightful. So it's really engaging and trying to ask good questions and engaging in these discussions so that we can have substance to our work. And just want to say thank you very much. Thanks, Leticia, for having us.
No, thank you both, Franz and Moitri, also people who's helping supporting us in the backstage, and to all for your active participation and being here joining the conversation that we hope continues in the program. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Till
Thank
next
you.
time.
Bye
Cheers.
bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.